that Christianity did not disappear when the Romans crucified Jesus on a lonely hill outside Jerusalem almost 2,000 years ago. Nearly 2,000 years ago, historians tell us, in a remote outpost of the Roman Empire, 3 men were crucified on a hill. 2 of the men were thieves. The third man's crime was mocked by the sign nailed to his cross: Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Jesus himself insisted his throne was in heaven, not of this world, but that didn't matter. The Romans saw him as a political nuisance. To his fellow Jews, he was just another failed Messiah. No one even thought to record his death. The story of Jesus has transcended generations and cultures. The tale of a routine execution that gave birth to a new religion. Yet from that unlikely beginning, a great faith was born. And today, some 2 billion people believe Jesus was the Son of God. But even as billions of people pledged themselves to follow Jesus' teachings, we have known almost nothing about Jesus the man. No other great religious figure, from Moses to the Buddha to the Prophet Muhammad, is so shrouded in mystery. The startling discovery of what some claim to be the burial box of Jesus' brother James reopened the biggest detective story of all time, the mystery of Jesus the man. The plain limestone container, called an ossuary, is inscribed with a tantalizing clue in Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke. James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. The public was enthralled, from people who flocked to see the ossuary on display to biblical scholars around the world. Could this be the first physical evidence that Jesus walked the earth? So when the Israeli authorities alleged 8 months after its discovery that the ossuary's inscription was forged, the centuries-old quest for the historical Jesus became ever more urgent. Did he have a real brother? Was Mary really a virgin? How did Jesus live? And why did he have to die? Who was Jesus the man? Why is the greatest story ever told also the greatest mystery never solved? Almost all we know about Jesus' life comes to us from the 4 books of the Gospels called Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Yet the Gospels were written anywhere between 40 and 70 years after Jesus died, and with an eye to converting people.
The Gospels weren't meant to be historically accurate accounts in the way we would think of. They weren't written according to our standards of biographical accuracy. They were meant to proclaim the good news of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection.
If you accept that these books are true, that's your evidence. We have no other evidence. The Gospels are books that were written, documents that were written at a time, not as journalism, not as history, not as the biography of Jesus, but they're documents written to justify faith. The Bible is a book of faith, not a book of history.
The story of Jesus, as told in the 4 Gospels, is an undisputed work of faith. When a specific historical approach is applied to the biblical story, such as exact dates and locations, intriguing questions begin to arise.
There are some discrepancies between the Gospels that simply cannot be explained away. That should lead us, however, not to ignore or throw out the Gospels, but to recognize what the Gospels really are. The Gospels are faith portraits.
The New Testament is the work of inventive but fallible men. The identity of over half the men who wrote it obscure.
The full story of Jesus' life comes from the Gospels, his mysterious birth, his remarkable mission, and the events that led to his death. But the Gospels were written by early Christians, at least 40 years after Jesus died. so it's often argued that they're the work of converts based only on oral records, and therefore can't be trusted as reliable historical documents.
Many modern scholars and theologians, and even some who are training for the priesthood, now seem to doubt the historical accuracy of the Gospels, and even the literal truth of the idea that Jesus rose from the dead.
Recently, I was teaching a graduate class, and 4 of the members of the graduate seminar are studying to be priests and ministers. And I asked them, do you believe this about the resurrection? And one of them, startled, said, well, no, but that's a secret.
The reality is, if you go into any theological college, any seminary, that's been the view for years. I mean, no one would have any problem with that. And again, it comes down to this rather patronising belief that ordinary folk out there have to believe that Noah's Ark existed, and have to believe that Mary was a virgin, and have to believe all this gumph, because somehow they can't be trusted to know that it's a bit more complicated than that.
I've never been able to find a real dichotomy myself between being a good historian and a good theologian, or a good historian and a Christian, to put it very bluntly. I do not believe that gods and goddesses or anyone ever comes down from heaven and produces divine babies. I don't believe it actually happens. Nor do I think that Jesus, in a literal sense, went up to heaven to take his place at the right hand of God.
None of the gospel stories is CNN in Jerusalem in the year 30.
These aren't people who are standing at the foot of the crucifix with notebooks in their hand, writing it all down.
The Gospels are written in the form of historical biography, so many people have assumed that they are exactly that. But that's not actually what they are. They're written to demonstrate to people the importance and the meaning of Jesus and his teaching. That was what they're for, and they do that very well. But they're not primarily interested in what actually happened back there.
Some scholars go so far as to suggest that the story of the resurrection was created not only to give authority to the church, but also as an extraordinary psychological tool to bring in new converts.
If it hadn't been for the resurrection of Jesus and his rising from the dead, victorious from the dead, we wouldn't be celebrating Christmas.
It's a bit like when you go into the army. The first thing we want is to take over your body. So symbolically, let's say we're going to shave all your hair. As long as you give in on this, we got you. We got your body, which is what we want. In one sense, sometimes the churches, some churches at least, do the same. We're going to tell you something unbelievable that you got to believe. If you believe it, then you will believe that they alone control heaven, that without them you cannot get into heaven, and then they've got you. You've left your brains in the parking lot.